Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Senator, I think that's wrong, what you just said, okay? I think when you have violent gangs in the city, killing people, murder, and so forth and so on, sometimes the most readily provable charge is their drug trafficking offenses, rather than proving culpability of the whole gang for murder. So you can take out a gang on drug offenses, and you could be taking out a lot of violent offenders. Do you think that the murders in Chicago are they're related to gangs, and again, gangs involved in?
And sir, and again, and we can get into the data if you'd like, and I'd like to get some more pointed questioning. But this is the sort of these are sort of the tropes that make people believe that in inner cities we should have such profound incarceration rates. And I'd like to ask you specifically about that data, because I think it's language like that makes me kind of concerned and worried. You said you hadn't reviewed, you said earlier in your testimony you hadn't reviewed criminal justice data about this actual issue of incarceration versus non-incarceration. I just want to know, will you commit to commissioning a study on just the concerns that we're talking about right now about the efficacy of reducing mass incarceration, publish those results? Would you be willing to do such a study yourself?
Well, as I understand it, I've been told that there's a lot of data to support the First Step Act.
Yeah, and that First Step Act goes directly towards addressing a lot of the problems we've had in mass incarceration. And so if you're saying that it is necessary to deal with violence in communities by over-incarcerating, here's a bipartisan group of senators that's working towards reducing mass incarceration. And that's why I think it's very important, which I appreciate you saying you didn't know because you hadn't reviewed the data. I think it's very important that you review the data and understand the implications for the language that you're using, which brings up this language of race, which is often not said explicitly, but when you talk about Chicago in the way you just did, it brings up racial fears or racial concerns. And you stated that if a black and a white, this is quoting you directly, are charged with the same offense, generally they will get the same treatment in the system and ultimately the same penalty. You previously quoted, and I quote you again, there's no statistical evidence that there of racism in the criminal justice system. Do you still believe that?
No, what I said was that I think that's taken out of a broader quote, which is the whole criminal justice system involves both federal but also state, local justice systems. And I said there's no doubt that there are places where there is racism still in the system. But I said overall, I thought that as a system, it's working. It's not predicated on.
So can I press you on that? Overall, the system treats blacks and whites fairly. From my own experience, I've lived in affluent communities. I've gone to the college campuses with you. There are certain drug laws applied there that's very different than the inner city community in which I live.
It is Wednesday, the 16th of January of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid me of this priest? Well, not all priests. There might be a couple that have a moral stricture to their behavior, you would think. But humans are humans, and humans will do what humans do. Speaking of which, you do a lot of thinking when you lose an adult child suddenly. And some of the thinking that I've been thinking is how my grief has been front and center. As if I'm alone in this. I've mentioned many, many times how I assisted at the birth of my son and the special bond that he and I had. And I was thinking, I seem to be putting my ex-wife not even in the room where my son was born. Who does that? If anybody deserves the condolences and the kind thoughts and the prayers, it's her. She carried him for 9 months. I was just assisting. Which kind of meant I was standing next to her head, giving her breathing coaching. Granted, our doctor allowed me to come and be the, first human hands, whatever that means. So if that has some sort of prominence in existence. But the first human hands to touch my son, and I guided him out of the birth canal and put him on her stomach as they cleaned him. I was only an assistant. I wasn't the lead actor in that. Give me a break. It was her. She was the single mom when I split. All I offered was a pithy statement and maybe some fatherly advice. She's the one that deserves the kind thoughts, the prayers, and the condolences. It's true. Okay, well, I had to get that out there, and bear with me. I will be probably mentioning this. I know people don't want to hear about, it's awkward listening to someone's grief. I understand that. Been there. But I do appreciate the patience you have all afforded me. Well, on the rest of the menu, of course, that was Cory Booker pushing back hard on Barr's claims about inner city violence and racial stereotypes about crime. This guy, I don't know, he is stuck back in the 90s when we had the welfare queens and the Lee Atwater coded, you know what. I do not believe for 1 second that this guy is an institutionalist, and his institutional muscle memory will preclude any kind of authoritarian dictator behavior by Trump. This guy has been an apologist for presidential overreach. The only reason he became AG for 14 months was so that he could pardon all the actors in Iran-Contra. And when he was done with that, he was gone. What do you think he's going to do now? A few pardons might be in the scheme, but this guy is an apologist. Dare I say maybe even a closet bigot? Or is it really closeted? I don't think so. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, acting EPA Chief Andrew Wheeler has been using agency staff to prep for his rushed confirmation hearing during the shutdown. Oh yeah, they're going to do confirmation hearings during the shutdown because who's looking? And who can do any background checks if they even wanted to? A federal judge smacked down the Trump administration for its, quote, egregious plot to rig the census. And a Trump appointee leaves the State Department after falling under multiple investigations for her blacklists of government employees she deemed disloyal to Trump. Oh, you mean like one of those Soviet and Red Chinese purges? After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where the U.S. economy is taking a larger than expected hit from the government shutdown, and a close examination of Barr's legal career indicates a high tolerance for presidentially sanctioned law-breaking. Told you so. All that and more in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link, and do engage there. Kelly Lincoln monitors that. Though she be a very busy gal, she does that diligently, and do engage. If you would then take a gander to the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice the contribute button, and in all seriousness, if you could become a recurring Patreon to Netroots Radio, and I got to tell you, thank you so much for those who have recently done so. It really helps, and I'll get back to you at least with a little note. But here's acknowledgement right here on the air, so and by podcast later on. All right, but becoming a Patreon, a recurring Patreon to Netroots Radio, that pays our bills, and we are truly unable to do this without you. Our pockets aren't very deep, so I noticed that for some reason Progressive Resistance Radio isn't endowed with just gobs and gobs of money. We don't inject enough hate. Well, at least hate to the right kind of people who should be hated, as according to some people. I mean, we don't hurt the people they want us to hurt. Let's put it that way. So, but yeah, there's no money being bestowed upon us in vast quantities. So your recurring contribution and being a recurring Patreon to Netroots Radio mitigates that lack of money raining on us from the sky. And we appreciate your generosity. And by dint of the fact that you are listening to this right now, Resistance Radio is resisting as the founders originally intended. All right. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter at Netroots Radio. How easy is that? You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Equally as easy. I post the show notes and links diary about 10 minutes before showtime on Daily Codes, where I can be found as Justice Putnam. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and we put podcasts of the show on Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the other ones. Because that's how it works in the World Wide Web. All right. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes our way by way of Think Progress. And Mark Hand had a hand in penning this. In fact, he penned it completely with his own hand. Sorry, Mark, I bet you've been getting that since grade school. Senate Republicans are rushing to get acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler confirmed as Scott Pruitt's replacement, despite a partial government shutdown that has kept the EPA closed since December 29th and employees unpaid. Wheeler's confirmation hearing is scheduled for today, and only 1 week after Trump nominated him to assume the top position at EPA on a permanent basis. After the hearing, the Senate committee will then vote on Wheeler's nomination. If his nomination is approved by the committee, which is a good bet, with the Republicans in the majority, the final step would be for the full Senate to vote on the nomination. Disaster capitalism, the shock doctrine, folks. When there's a tragedy, even of your own making, some sort of dissonance out there in the government, you just capitalize on that and you ram through every single policy. You try to get every single wacko judge that has been well groomed by the Federalist Society, I may add. It looks like they are trying to rush him through. Virginia Cantor, chief ethics counsel for the government watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, affectionately known as CREW. Anytime you have a candidate who you are trying to rush through, it means that you don't want people to look too closely at his record or his industry ties, because if you thought Scott Pruitt was bad, Andrew Wheeler is like a Scott Pruitt, and I'm pretty sure without that little cone of silence in which Pruitt would enter, and I think he thought it was like the Ark, and he was communicating with God. I'm not kidding. I'm serious. Look it up. From the perspective of implementing Trump's anti-environment agenda, Wheeler has worked as efficiently as Pruitt to roll back environmental regulations. Yeah, he thinks that there's a minimum daily requirement of mercury, and if there's a minimum daily requirement of mercury, well, gosh darn it, double that. And Wheeler has gotten himself embroiled in a similar multitude of scandals that sidetrack Pruitt from his mission to effectively dismantle the EPA. Along with concern over EPA employees being used to prep Wheeler for the hearing instead of focusing on public health matters, a federal court in late December ordered the EPA to release more than 20,000 emails and meeting calendars as part of a lawsuit brought by the Sierra Club, seeking records relating to any communications Wheeler and other agency officials have had with companies regulated by the agency. Putting together a schedule for the release of those records has been delayed by the government shutdown. Wow, there's so many win-win-wins here. Trump thinks it's going to delay Mueller from whatever he's doing. And it's certainly stopping the government in its tracks from doing most anything. And what a gift! You know, they do have Christmas a little bit later in Russia than here. This next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Christmas in Russia also reminds me that the Ukrainian Russian Orthodox Church, which is the original Russian Orthodox Church, has splintered from the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow, which essentially makes the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow no longer part of the Russian Orthodox Church, according to the Ukrainian, because they take precedence since they're the ones that originated the Russian Orthodox Church. So I just thought that was a little bit of ecumenical information that maybe might have slipped through the cracks of the edifice of Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. I was going to get there somehow. Dan Desai Martin brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Don't forget, it is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, a truly elegant egg dish with a lovely velvety hollandaise sauce. A federal judge yesterday, that being Tuesday, flatly rejected the Trump administration's racist attempt to insert a question about citizenship status into the 2020 census. Well, if you don't think that people are people, and you're not even willing to give them 3/5 of being a people, I believe that the term racist aptly applies. Judge Jesse M. Furman of the U.S. District Court of the Southern District of New York ruled that Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross committed egregious violations of the law when he made the arbitrary and capricious decision to add the citizenship question. Well, look, Wilbur is a banker in Cyprus. Let's not forget, okay? And who's the major depositor of money in a bank in Cyprus? Well, let's put it this way. The keyboards on the computer are in Cyrillic, not Greek. Asking about citizenship would likely make the census less accurate because it would discourage many immigrants from returning their census forms. Undercounting minority communities on the census would hurt those communities on a variety of fronts, from congressional representation to funding for roads and schools. You don't think that a KGB guy like Putin doesn't know all of this, do you? I mean, he's done it in his own country. Funding for roads? Give me my fig. You want schools? Give me my fig. Well, of course, it would also give Republicans an unfair political advantage, that question on the citizenship, or that citizenship question on the census. If it is allowed on the 2020 census, it could shift the nation's balance of political powers from cities to more rural communities over the next decade and give Republicans a new advantage in drawing electoral boundaries, because vacant property is people too, my friends. The judge's decision was based on how Ross and the administration made the decision to add the citizenship question, not the racist impact of such a question, but is still a victory for the plaintiffs and for those who care about the integrity of the census, at least for now. Today's ruling is a strong signal to the Trump administration that attempts to politicize and corrupt the 2020 census will fail. Thomas Wolfe, executive director of the Brennan Center for Justice, said in a statement. While today's ruling is a victory, we cannot rely solely on the courts to swat down this xenophobic and politically nefarious question, Representative Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas, said. And he's also chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He continued that Congress must come together across party lines to ensure we protect the census from politicization and ensure every person is counted justly and accurately. The Trump administration, of course, has come to be defined by its virulent anti-immigration policies. Now, we all know that Trump kicked off his 2016 campaign coming down an escalator. I mean, it's just in his dictator neo-chic hotel, calling Mexicans rapists. Remember? Rapists, drug addicts, the worst kind of people. And one of his first acts after his sparsely attended inauguration was an ill-fated ban on Muslims entering the United States. Trump has defended white supremacists after a hate-filled rally in Charlottesville, denigrated immigrants from Haiti and Africa by claiming they come from, shithole countries, and instigated the country's longest government shutdown over a racist attempt to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. The attempt to put a citizenship question on the 2020 census is just another in a long line of anti-immigrant racism from the Trump administration, and once again, the courts have to step in to squash the most egregious excesses. The less egregious, we'll just let them go through. story brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, if you didn't know. A State Department official under investigation for allegedly... Oh, let's stop with this journalistic practice of alleged. Not with this administration. There's nothing alleged. They got caught red-handed, all right? Let's be clear. Of creating blacklists of government employees thought to be disloyal to Donald Trump has left her position. Politico reported yesterday Mary Stull, dubbed the Vino Vixen, due to her erstwhile career as a food and beverage lobbyist and a wine blog she published. And it's red and white wine, not like the typical wine of grievance that the right wing has, okay? Just to be clear. Well, she was the target of 2 separate investigations into bullying and intimidation by Trump-appointed officials. Oh, really? You mean like how Trump normally conducts business? Yeah. At the State Department, she served as a senior advisor in the department's International Organizations Bureau. Her position put her in direct contact with the United Nations, despite being extremely critical of international organizations. Wait a second. Is she only drinking American wine? I don't think so. If she is truly a wine connoisseur, writing a wine blog, she's drinking wine from all over the world. She also worked to thwart international organizations focused on the human rights of Palestinians and reproductive rights. Well, she's hitting the trifecta on everything. And it's not clear yet what her next career move is. Actually, I can imagine. She's being essentially kicked out for conducting what might be criminal activity. She's going to be bumped up into the administration. That's how it works. There's no one really left, which makes you wonder why Barr wants to be Attorney General. Oh, that's right. Pardon is in his resume. It is indeed. All right, well, let's go ahead and get to our break. And when we come back from the break, you know that we're going to go through weather from around the world. And you know that after weather from around the world, there's some science and civil liberties news. Of course you know that. And other news and tidbits of information. And then we're going to finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Bleak Street. Much like his previous movie, Moonlight, director Barry Jenkins manages to create a beautiful, multi-layered movie out of a sad story. Set in 1970s New York, despite being named for the famous Memphis Blues Boulevard, and based on the novel by James Baldwin, If Beale Street Could Talk tells the tale of a young African-American couple, Fonnie and Tish, as they fall in love and create a family, as tragic events are about to befall. Specifically, it involves Fonnie being falsely accused of rape, just as Tish learns she's pregnant with the couple's first child. The Beale Street reference is symbolic, referring to where every black person was born, according to Baldwin. The legend that Louis Armstrong was born there is apparently just that, however. The film stands as a meditation on the struggles of African Americans in a justice system where the odds are stacked and makes personal the effects that mass incarceration has on that community. It is uncomfortably effective, especially as the film is set 40-plus years ago, and these are still contemporary issues. Since this is based on the work of James James Baldwin, it's not a spoiler to say that Beale Street won't have a happy ending. In anyone else's hands, the story could come across as a soap opera. But Jenkins' deft direction, including the shooting of longtime collaborating cinematographer James Laxton and the work of his actors, prevent that. Specifically, Stephan James, a 25-year-old Toronto native, best known for his work in Amazon's Homecoming, shines as Fonnie. Likewise, Regina King, who recently won a Best Supporting Actress Golden Globe, is incredible in her role as Tish's mother, who tries her best to clear Fonnie's name. If Beale Street Could Talk is a forceful gem of a movie, a worthy follow-up to Moonlight, and one that will likely be similarly remembered during awards season. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Birds in Europe have the same problem as residents of cities like New York and L.A., a housing crisis. Not enough nest space to go around. For a species called pied flycatchers that migrate from West Africa, things can get deadly if they end up nesting in the wrong spot.
There's no chance for them.
Yelmer Samplonius is a climate change ecologist at the University of Edinburgh. He says the flycatchers face fearsome foes in the form of bigger resident songbirds called great tits.
The great tit basically splits open the skull at the back and eats the brain. That's the gist of it.
Samplonius and his colleague Christian Both recorded more than a decade's worth of those conflicts in nearly 1,000 nest boxes in the Dutch countryside. They determined that warmer winters can boost resident great tit numbers, increasing the chance of flycatcher slaughter. But warmer springtime temperatures can throw the two species' nesting times out of sync, which would actually reduce deadly conflict. In addition, over the past 30 years, male flycatchers seem to be arriving earlier and earlier, regardless of springtime temperature trends. In other words,
it's complex.
But the upshot is that conflicts between the two birds are on the rise when some of these shifting factors align. And when they do, as many as 1 in 10 male flycatchers can die at the claws of great tits. The death tolls are in the journal Current Biology. The bloodbath doesn't seem to be affecting the overall flycatcher population yet, perhaps because the victims are primarily males that arrive late, destined to fail at the mating game anyway. But Samplonius says if climate change increases the numbers of resident birds, migrants could increasingly arrive at their breeding grounds and find an eviction notice, or worse, a literally head-splitting situation. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
On Election Day 2018, an overwhelming majority of voters in Florida, 65%, approved a state constitutional amendment to restore the right to vote to most people who have been convicted of felonies and completed their sentence. And now, I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Even though that constitutional amendment, called Amendment 4, was supposed to automatically go into effect on January 8th and allow former felons to register to vote just like everyone else, the new governor, Ron DeSantis, has claimed that Amendment 4 can't take effect until the legislature, which doesn't even meet till March, approves implementing language. Advocates dispute that, pointing to the fact that nothing in the constitutional amendment itself indicates that any legislation is required, although some local election officials who control voter rolls and procedures may be swayed by the governor's statement. In November 2018, more than 5 million Floridians voted in favor of Amendment 4. On that same election day, 1.5 million Floridians, the majority of whom are white and included 23% of the African American community, were not allowed to vote because of that state's felony disenfranchisement rule that Amendment 4 repealed and reversed. The constitutional amendment and the overwhelming support for it means it's past time, for the right to vote to be honored in the Sunshine State. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings for Attorney General nominee Bill Barr began on Tuesday and continue Wednesday.
William Barr came to his confirmation hearing with one mission: make it clear he will not interfere with Robert Mueller's investigation.
Do you believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt against anybody?
I don't believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt.
Barr was asked what he would do if the president directed him to fire Mueller.
Assuming there was no good cause?
Assuming no good cause.
I would not carry out that instruction.
He assured senators from both parties that he'll make Mueller's conclusions public.
I am going to make as much information available as I can, consistent with the rules and regulations that are part of the special counsel regulations.
Barr defended a memo he wrote in June that attacked Mueller and called fatally misconceived the idea that a president can be charged with obstructing justice for firing his own FBI director. And Barr said at this point in his life, when he planned on retirement, he won't be afraid to do what's right.
And I will not be bullied into doing anything I think is wrong by anybody, whether it be editorial boards or Congress or the president.
Although Barr sounded all the right notes in his opening statement, things got a bit more dicey once he began answering actual questions. After we learned all about the emoluments clause of the Constitution over the past 2 years, it was kind of a shock to hear that the man in line to be the chief law enforcement officer of the land has no clue what it is.
Including the emoluments clause of the Constitution.
I think there's a dispute as to what the emoluments clause relates to. I have not personally researched the emoluments clause. I can't even tell you what it says at this point. Off the top of my head, I would have said, well, emoluments are essentially a stipend attached to some office, but I don't know if that's correct or not.
Another horrifying moment came during the long pregnant pause before Barr's terrifying answer to this question from Senator Amy Klobuchar.
We obviously have the tragic case of a journalist who worked right here at the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi. So I want to ask you something I asked Attorney General Sessions. If you're confirmed, will the Justice Department jail reporters for doing their jobs?
I think that, I know there are guidelines in place, and I can conceive of situations where, as a last resort, and where a news organization has run through a red flag or something like that, knows that they're putting out stuff that will hurt the country. There could be a situation where someone would be held in contempt. But
well, Attorney General Sessions had said he was going to look at potentially changing those rules at one point. So I'd like you to maybe respond in writing to this.
And despite his assurances earlier in the hearing that he'd be, quote, transparent with Mueller's final report, Barr was singing a different song while answering questions from Senator Blumenthal.
Are you saying, for example, that if information is deleted that would be like for classification purposes, I would identify that and things like that? I have to say that the rules, I don't know what kind of report is being prepared. I have no idea. And I have no idea what Acting Attorney General Rosenstein has discussed with Special Counsel Mueller. If I'm confirmed, I'm going to go in and see what game plan they have in mind.
It's still only January 2019, but the Democratic presidential hopeful field is expanding. It began last week with Julian Castro's announcement that he's forming an exploratory committee, followed by Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, former Maryland Representative John Delaney, and former West Virginia State Senator Richard Ojeda. And then there were 6. In an appearance Tuesday night on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Kirsten Gillibrand said she was forming an exploratory committee to raise money and travel the country for her presidential run. For a Republican Party who's put up with their leaders' regular racism and vulgarity, they sure are bent out of shape over one of their members displaying the same types of behaviors he's been displaying for years. But apparently Steve King's racism got to be too much for the House, who overwhelmingly voted to reject white nationalism and white supremacy, passed 424-1. With Bobby Rush of Illinois being the lone no vote because he said it didn't go far enough. And yes, if you're counting, Steve King actually voted yes. Go figure. Misery loves company. As bad as things are over here in the U.S. with a shuttered government and megalomaniacal narcissist in the White House, Great Britain is also having troubles. Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal came up for a vote on Tuesday and was trounced, losing by 230 votes, the biggest defeat for any UK government in the modern parliamentary era. And finally, Wednesday marks day 26 of the government shutdown with no end in sight. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The British Parliament rejected a Brexit deal negotiated by Prime Minister Theresa May on Tuesday, setting up a challenge to her leadership and throwing Britain's future relationship with the EU in doubt. Lawmakers shot down May's Brexit proposal by a margin of 230 votes, and she crucially lost the support of 118 members of her own Conservative Party. Conservatives who voted against May's Brexit deal may well stand by her as she faces a possible no-confidence vote, but it's hard to see a path for the current government to craft a satisfactory Brexit deal, given that the Conservative caucus is being pulled equally hard from the political right and the political left. And the comments of 3 Conservative MPs before Tuesday's vote reveal how deep those divisions truly are. MP Michael Wood held out hope a better deal could still be negotiated.
The government must listen to genuine concerns across this House, and the deal that it comes back to this House with must genuinely take back the control that people voted for in 2016. I will support that work starting tonight.
MP Matt Marwin disagreed, saying that while May's deal wasn't perfect, rejecting it would boost those who wish to cancel Brexit.
When I vote with the Prime Minister tonight, I do so because I am committed to Brexit, and voting against this deal puts wind in the sails of those who seek to stop it.
And May argued the opposite of that, saying that killing her deal raised the likelihood the UK crash out of the EU in March with no agreements in place.
I hope that those who fear leaving without a deal, whose constituents rely on manufacturing jobs, think very carefully about rejecting a deal that is the only guaranteed way to take no deal off the table.
They say time heals all wounds, but it's not clear more of it will help solve Brexit. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, because, hey, the locus is wherever you are. Okay, well, the mothership happens to be situated right here in the Rogue River Valley, right next to the Rogue River, I must say. And right now we have temperature at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and we are expected to go to a high of about 48 to 50 degrees, a little bit cooler than yesterday. And overnight lows look like they will be in the low 40s, upper 30s. Indeed, that's what they will be. And for the next few days, it looks like we'll have the same highs as well, about 48 to 50 degrees. Right now, we are not raining, but we will be. There is water in the sky, quite a large amount, I might add. And winds currently are out of the northeast, light and variable, which is about 1 mile per hour. But we are under an active wind advisory because the winds will be shifting out of the east-southeast in about an hour or less, and picking up to 10 to 20 miles per hour in continuous steady winds, with gusts topping off, about 50 or 60, that kind of wind advisory, along with rain. And we look to get just about a half an inch for today and tonight. The wind, though, will be shifting out of the south-southeast and continue its clip at 10 to 20 miles per hour with that active wind advisory. And then tomorrow, we're expected to get to another half inch of rain, and the winds will then be out of the south at their continuous 10 to 20 miles per hour, gusting 40 to 60 miles per hour in our active wind advisory. How nice. Pollen is none because it's either windy or it's been washed from the sky. Air quality, though, is unhealthy at 114 parts per million. Ouch, that's a lot of smoke being held in. Well, the wind ought to take that away. Visibility is at 9 miles. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.52 inches. And relative humidity is at 87%. Wow. Okay, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Some people have P-tapes that they've made on their own, and other people have P-tapes that have been made without their knowledge, and then they find out later how many P's they popped. London is 48 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 45 degrees and cloudy, and I must specify that this specific planted personal weather station is in the 7th arrondissement of Paris, which means it's probably not planted, it's affixed. That's what I think. Rome is 54 and partly cloudy with an active weather advisory, which I am tuning into right now. Oh, potential disruption due to rain. Well, that's nice. Let's see how much they're going to get. Where are you? Oh, my gosh. Okay, well, they look like they're expecting about an inch of rain, and that's quite a bit for Rome. I guess they don't wick it off as easily as maybe we like to do. Kiev is 30 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 36 with smoke. Now, if we have unhealthy air quality index and their weather forecast is for smoke as opposed to water vapor like fog, wow, that's something, as I say. Hong Kong is 57 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 41 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 75 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy, and also in an active wind advisory. Small craft, do take care on the bay. Do take care offshore. And high-profile vehicles on all the bridges, oh my God, maybe you want to go around. I know it's longer, 70 miles or more, but what do you want? A load of goods blocking the bridge? Or your life being spared by taking the scenic route? Your choice. And that is, no, wait a second. New York is 34 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy, and a proper January day it is for New York. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. First amuse-bouche is out of Reuters by Steve Holland and David Morgan. The U.S. economy is taking a larger than expected hit from the government shutdown, White House estimates showed yesterday, as contractors and even the Coast Guard go without pay, and talks to end the impasse seem stalled. Oh, really? I guess that's one way of putting it. The longest such shutdown in U.S. history dragged into its 25th day, with neither Trump nor Democratic congressional leaders showing signs of bending on the topic that triggered it. Funding for a wall Trump promised to build along the border with Mexico that Mexico was supposed to pay for, and it was just a mnemonic device so that this guy could remember to appease to the lizard brain part of their base. You know, the racist tickle. That part. That's what we're doing right now. People need their racism stoked and stroked. Trump insists Congress shell out $5.7 billion for wall funding this year, as about 800,000 federal workers go unpaid during the shutdown. He has refused to support legislation providing money for a range of agencies to operate until he gets his way. He's a petulant little bee. And let's be clear. He's getting his orders from somewhere, and you know it. With the shutdown dragging on, federal courts will run out of operating funds on January 25th and face serious disruptions. Jeez. Do you think Vlad could have planned it any better? Probably not. To try to take some of the sting out of the shutdown, Trump planned to sign on Wednesday, that being today, the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019, which is legislation that would ensure that those federal workers furloughed will receive back pay once the shutdown is over, except he thought he got to keep the money himself personally because he's got to get a kickback up to Vlad. He owes. He promised. He promised to be an earner. And you know what happens when you stop being an earner? Yeah. One of those convenient little disruptions in maybe your life. Now, while the shutdown hit about 1/4 of federal operations, nearly 4 in 10 U.S. adults said they were either affected by the impasse or know someone who is. 51% of those polled by the Reuters Ipsos polling group blamed Trump for the shutdown, which means 49% didn't. Wow. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen said she was working with the White House and Congress to pass legislation to fund the Coast Guard. While the Pentagon is not affected by the shutdown because they got so much money, do you really think $800,000 million for a screw is really for the screw? Come on. And do you really think it's for the secret alien at Area 54? I think not. It's a slush fund, and they got a lot of it. Like other branches of the U.S. military, active duty Coast Guard should be paid for their services and sacrificed to this nation. Kirsten Nielsen wrote on Twitter, Sieg Heil! Kirsten Nielsen, Sieg Heil! The Trump administration had initially estimated the shutdown would cost the economy about 0.1 percentage point in growth every 2 weeks that employees were without pay, but on Tuesday, there was an updated figure. 0.13 percentage point every week because of the impact of work left undone by 380,000 furloughed employees, as well as work left aside by federal contractors. The economic risk prompted hawkish Federal Reserve officials to call for the central bank to pause interest rates. And the shutdown's effects have begun to reverberate across the country. Longer lines have formed at some airports as more security screeners fail to show up for work. Just do what Reagan did. Fire them all. Start over. Get your own little, mobsters in there. The ones on the payroll that don't show up, but they get paid for anyway. Because do you really think that much money for a screw is really for the screw?
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Jefferson Morley of the Independent Media Institute brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, now Trump's nominee to be Attorney General has what Trump might call deep state credentials. Barr came to Langley in 1973. He was a 23-year-old graduate of Columbia with a master's in political science and Chinese studies. His resume shows he toiled at the CIA by day and attended George Washington U Law School at night. The Watergate scandal is ravaging the agency's reputation and destroying the presidency of Richard Nixon. A close examination of Barr's legal career indicates a high tolerance for presidentially sanctioned lawbreaking. Barr spent 4 formative years in the Intelligence Directorate and the Office of Legislative Counsel. He even made the acquaintance of CIA Director George H.W. Bush. And in 1977, Barr moved on to a prestigious clerkship for a federal judge and then a series of jobs in private practice and the Justice Department. In 1991, Bush was then president and appointed Barr to be Attorney General, the youngest Attorney General ever to hold that office. He left after 1 year and went on to a career in corporate law and public service. Barr now returns to his old job at the behest of besieged Donald Trump. Now, let's be clear. He was in that role for 1 year to hand out pardons and misdirect the whole Iran-Contra investigation. Then he went into corporate private practice and got locked into the mindset of criminality from 91. Welfare queens and crack babies. And now Trump's brought him back because he thinks he's getting all the old team together. I must say, though, that Barr's efforts worked rather well for the Iran-Contra scofflaws. Do we let them get away with it again? Do we? All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but we'll be back tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Stay tuned to Netroots Radio for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.